Hello wizards, warlocks, and warriors, welcome to Multiverse. On this little channel we'll talk about games like Baldur's Gate, Dragon Age, Icewind Dale, and more. Let's get this party started. At this point, my Multiverse channel is pretty much dedicated to talking about DC Universe Online, but some of you guys sometimes ask Multiverse, what other games in DC Universe Online do you play? So I decided to make a channel to talk about those games. On this channel, we'll talk mainly about fantasy games. If I ever decide to talk about other games like Destiny or Fallout, I have another channel that I could use to talk about those games. Today we'll start with a bit of history of the games I played, and let us start where it all really started, with the fighting fantasy novels or Find Your Fate novels, depending on how they were labeled at the time. Way back when I was a young whippersnapper, sadly we did not have computers, or computers existed, but we didn't have the home computer like we have right now, and we didn't have consoles just yet. Heck, we did not even have arcade games way back when. All we had were pinball machines, and the closest thing we had at the time to computer role-playing games would be those fighting fantasy novels, or D&D, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. In case you do not know about those fighting fantasy novels, you do not read the book in order. Basically, there's a number assigned to each paragraph, and at the end of each paragraph, you will have choices to make. And depending on which choice you make, it will send you to another paragraph. So it could tell you go to page 53, paragraph 24, and that is where you need to go to continue the story. Sometimes also there would be dices involved, so sometimes you would be fighting some evil creature, and you would need to roll dices to decide if you defeat the creature or not. It was pretty much a very simplified version of Dungeons and Dragons that you could play all by yourself. So you did not need a game master or anything, the book was the game master. Usually those books were self-contained, but sometimes there would be also a series. Like there was a series, the Lone Wolf series, which was a series of, I forget how many books there were. So you would have a whole series of books where you would play the Lone Wolf character. But later on we would graduate to playing Dungeons and Dragons. At the time we had the Red Box rule set, and then later on we moved on to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Sadly, Dungeons and Dragons required a dedicated group, a dedicated game master, or dungeon masters as we would call it. So you needed to have a group of people that could meet once, twice a week so that you could play the campaign. Sadly, it wasn't rare that there would be one or two people missing, so it would be a bit of a pain in the butt for the dungeon master to have to play the missing players. And then the next week, when the players would come back, we would have to fill them in on what happened the week before, and sometimes they did not exactly agree with some of the choices that the dungeon master made with their character. Sadly, they were not there to play the character, so too bad, so sad. And sadly, once the guys started having steady girlfriends, or even worse, when they started having kids, it became even more and more challenging to get a group of players who would be there week after week after week to play the gaming session. So afterwards, we pretty much graduated to playing Magic the Gathering. We would still play D&D once in a while, but Magic pretty much became our main source of gaming at the time. I was playing Black because I liked summoning evil creatures and the evil skeletons and stuff like that. Sadly, one of the strengths of Black was to having players discard, and I wasn't too crazy about that strategy. So I was playing Black mostly to summon creatures, so I was pretty much a summoner more than anything else. And I wasn't using the abilities that were making people discard very much. The exception to that would probably be the Hypnotic Spectre. The Hypnotic Spectre was such a good flying creature that the ability to have the player discard cards was just icing on the cake. So we pretty much switched to Magic the Gathering for a while because it was much easier to get a group together. It was easy enough to get 4, 5, 6 people who had a Magic deck, and you did not need them to be the same players week after week after week. Heck, during a single gaming session, there could be people coming in, leaving, it didn't really matter. As long as you had your Magic deck, you could join the game anytime you wanted, or you could leave anytime you wanted. Although sometimes we'd use formats like the Emperor format, where we would play 3 versus 3. Although we did not have to play Emperor format, if we were 6 players, then yeah, we would play the Emperor format, but if we were 5 players or 7 players, I would just play free for all. Or sometimes we would have some alternate rules where we would say something like, okay, we can just attack our opponent to the left. So for a while, Magic was a very fun game to play, but it was a bit somewhat expensive sometimes. You could build a deck for cheap, but if you really wanted to, you could go crazy and spend a lot of cash to build your deck. Then for Christmas 2001, I purchased my first computer, and then a friend gave me Diablo 2. I wasn't really planning to play games on my computer. Heck, it was the very first computer I ever had. I knew nothing about computers at the time, so it was a bit of a learning process. But then my friend gave me a copy of Diablo 2. For some reason, he had two copies, so he gave me his extra copy. And holy crap, it was life was good. I spent my 2 weeks Christmas vacation playing and playing and playing Diablo 2. I would play all day, and then by the end of the day, I would fall asleep in my bed with my laptop in my bed. And then the next morning, as soon as I would wake up, I would keep on playing and playing. It was pretty awesome. And then once I was done playing Diablo 2, I started looking for other games. I wasn't exactly done. Like, I had played the whole campaign on the regular setting. And at the time, I thought that I was pretty much done with the game. I had played the whole campaign, the whole story. So I started looking for other similar games so that I could play more other campaigns and other stories. Later on, I would come back to playing Diablo 2 on the more difficult settings. But it was only a few months later. There's quite a few games I played before I came back to Diablo 2. Also, I would not really call myself a Diablo fan. I'm more of a Necromancer fan. I really enjoyed playing the Necromancer. Didn't like playing the other characters so much. With the Necromancer, my fun was to summon a small army of undead and support them with the biggest bow I could find. Unlike other players who usually go with a lot of strength for their Necromancer to be able to use their Bone Wand and the biggest armor they can find, actually what I would do is that I would put all my skill points into skeletons and whatever abilities that would make my skeletons more powerful. I would put all my points in dexterity, and I would get the biggest bow I could find, and then I would back up my skeletons from a distance using my bow. It was pretty fun. I'll have to make a video about that at some point. So once I was done with the regular version of the campaign for Diablo 2, I started looking for more and more games, and I found Baldur's Gate. And Baldur's Gate was pretty awesome. To begin with, it was pretty much like playing AD&D, but you did not need a game master. The computer was the game master, and you did not need to have to find a regular group of players. You would actually meet the NPCs in the game, and those NPCs would join your group. So it was a perfect option to be able to play D&D without anyone else. Although early on I was a bit of a foolish fool, I did not know how to use the AI to be able to control the NPCs. So the NPCs that were in my group kept on dying and dying, and I was doing as if I was playing D&D. I would go to the nearest temple, I would spend a bit of cash to be able to bring them back to life, and sadly that happened so much that very quickly I was broke. So at some point I said, to heck with it, I kicked all the NPCs out of my group, and I continued solo with my Uber Mage Thief. And holy crap was it hard. The Mage Thief has probably the worst Thaco in D&D. For those who don't know, Thaco is to hit armor class 0. So trying to hit an NPC with my short sword was very challenging, let's say. And also in D&D, D&D is very unforgiving for low level characters. So like when your character has 4-6 hit points, it doesn't take a lot for evil monsters, even just tiny goblins, to kill your character. It's sad, but that's how it is. So it was rough the first few levels, but as my character would level up, eventually it became much easier, especially seeing how I only had the one character. I would gain a lot of experience. Like normally the experience would be split amongst the whole party, so amongst 6 characters. But seeing how I was the one character, I would get all the experience whenever I would complete a quest. So once my character started leveling up, it became easier and easier playing the game. Also, I would use abilities like hide in shadows and invisibility to be able to become invisible. And then I would use the backstab of the thief to try to take down enemies. And later on, it pretty much became a tradition. Whenever I would play an Infinity Engine game, like Baldur's Gate, Baldur's Gate 2, Icewind Dale, Icewind Dale 2, I would play it with my solo mage thief first, before I played then the game again with a full party. Although Icewind Dale 2 was using 3rd edition or 4th edition, I forget, it's been a while since I played it. And so it did not have the multi-class system that Advanced Dungeons and Dragons had. So I created something as close to my Mage Thief as I could for Icewind Dale 2. And then of course I played Baldur's Gate 2 afterwards. And what is great is that you could import your character from Baldur's Gate into Baldur's Gate 2. That sad thing is that at the start of Baldur's Gate 2, you lose all your gear. There's a glitch that you can use to be able to keep all your gear. I'm not sure if it's a glitch or if it's just a cheat. But anyway, there's a way to that you can keep all your gear if you want to. But technically, when you start Baldur's Gate 2, all your gear is gone. But you can at least have your character that you had in Baldur's Gate 1. So Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2 is pretty much a huge saga that you can play with your character. Already just playing Baldur's Gate, it took me like a couple hundred hours because I did explore every single corner that I could find. Also, I was solo, so that may have made the progress a bit slower, at least at first. And the same with Baldur's Gate 2. Baldur's Gate 2, I explored everything I could. So Baldur's Gate 2, and the 2 expansions, that gave you a huge game that you could play with the same character. And of course, when I was done with the Baldur's Gate saga, I had to find more games. So I got Icewind Dale. But that will be a story for another time. So next time we will talk about Icewind Dale, Planescape Torment, Neverwinter Nights, and more. See you then.